In the summer of 1546, a young woman was borne to her execution seated in a chair, her body so shattered by torture that she could no longer stand. An Askew had survived what ought to have been impossible, a gentlewoman stretched upon the rack, a device of torment meant only for the lowest criminals. 023, yet even with joints wrenched apart and endurance pushed past all human limits, she would not betray the fellow Protestants who shared her faith. The story of this extraordinary woman exposes one of the darkest chapters of religious persecution in Tudor England, an era when conscience could cost a person everything and the engines of state terror worked with ruthless precision. 046, an Askew lived in a time when what you believed decided whether you lived or died, though the England of her early years was far more tangled than a simple clash of Catholic against Protestant. Born around 1521 into a prosperous Lincolnshire family, she grew up amid the storm of the English Reformation. 111, Henry VIII had severed ties with Rome and declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, yet the religious boundaries stayed perilously unclear. The king's own doctrines shifted like shifting sands, leaving no one certain which beliefs were safe from one week to the next. Catholics still wielded great influence at court, while Protestant reformers pressed for sweeping changes that would sweep away centuries of tradition. 136, Tudor England's religious terrain was a deadly minefield where the careless could be blown apart by forces they scarcely comprehended. Henry's break with the Pope had opened a theological void that rival factions rushed to fill, each insisting their version of Christianity carried God's own seal. The 6 Articles of 1539 had dragged many Catholic teachings back into law while preserving the king's authority over the Pope. 207, the result was a strange mongrel faith that satisfied neither staunch Catholics nor fervent Protestants, leaving ordinary believers unsure which road led to heaven and which to the stake. Young and possessed something perilous in Tudor England, a well-trained mind and rock-solid convictions. 228, unlike almost any woman of her day, she read Latin fluently and had steeped herself in scripture, skills her father had fostered as suitable for a lady of her rank. When he married her to Thomas Kyme, a Catholic who loathed her beliefs, and found herself caught between marital duty and private faith. From the beginning the household rang with theological dispute instead of peace. 252, she gave him 2 children, yet in the end she made a choice that scandalized Tudor society. She left husband and children behind to follow her religious calling in London. That act of defiance would doom her, but it also laid bare the steel of her commitment. In Tudor England a wife was legally and spiritually subject to her husband's religion, by walking away, and became a religious outlaw in her own land. 325, she lost all rights to her children and most of her property, turning herself into a kind of domestic exile. Her rebellion threatened not only Catholic teaching but the whole social order that kept women beneath male authority. That double threat would later make her punishment far harsher, for the authorities saw her as dangerous to both church and state. 356, in London's secret Protestant circles and swiftly earned respect as a gifted theologian and bold preacher. She could hold her own in scripture debate with university-trained men and openly challenge Catholic doctrine. Her surviving writings display a keen mind and unyielding Protestant conviction. For 19, she rejected transubstantiation, denied that priests could forgive sins, and questioned the veneration of saints, views that most Protestants today take for granted but which Tudor law branded as heresy worthy of burning. Her eloquence won followers, it also caught the eye of officials who watched religious dissent with growing alarm. For 48, London's Protestant underground was a shadowy world of hidden worship, banned books, and whispered codes. And moved through it with striking courage, attending illegal services, passing forbidden texts, corresponding with reformers across England and the continent. Her home became a safe house where dangerous ideas could be spoken aloud. 520, that very openness would prove fatal, as government spies wormed deeper into Protestant groups. Her first arrest came in 1545 on charges of distributing banned books and preaching heresy, serious accusations, yet framed carefully to probe how far royal protection reached. 543, powerful Protestant friends, including the Queen's own kindred Catherine Parr, shielded her at first. She was questioned and released, but the authorities had only begun. They believed and held the threads to a wider Protestant web that menaced the Catholic party at court. 602, what they wanted were names, and they were convinced Askew could unlock the whole conspiracy. The political stakes of 1546 could scarcely have been higher. The aging Henry VIII grew ever more erratic, rival factions maneuvered for the coming struggle over the succession. 628, the Catholic party, spearheaded by Stephen Gardiner and Thomas Wriothesley, saw a chance to crush their Protestant enemies by proving disloyalty to the crown. If they could tie Queen Catherine Parr herself to heresy, they might wipe out the reformist faction and dominate the boy Prince Edward's future reign. 650, Anne's second arrest in June 1546 began an ordeal that appalled even seasoned Tudor officials. Taken to the Tower, she faced questioning by some of the realm's most powerful men, among them Lord Chancellor Wriothesley and Sir Richard Rich. 710, by the standards of their time these were not sadists but cold pragmatists who viewed Anne as a tool for larger aims. They demanded the names of other Protestants, above all those linked to Queen Catherine Parr. Success could topple the Protestant cause entirely and remake England's religion. 734, the questioning blended scholarly debate with psychological cruelty. Her interrogators, learned divines themselves, could match her knowledge of Scripture, arguing for hours to trap her in inconsistency. They swung between threats and promises, freedom if she talked, vivid descriptions of agony if she stayed silent. 806, they paraded former friends who had already broken, hoping shame would do what logic could not. When gentle pressure failed, they kept her awake for days and tampered with her food and drink to weaken resistance. When words proved useless, the council took a step without precedent in English history. They ordered a noblewoman racked. 831, this breached every rule of class and gender. The rack was deemed unfit for anyone of gentle blood. Yet and silence had driven her questioners to extremity. Authorization came from the king himself, revealing how desperately high the stakes had climbed. 856, they calculated that news of a gentlewoman tortured would terrify other Protestants into compliance. They also assumed, fatally, that a woman would crack faster under pain. Both calculations betrayed how little they understood the woman before them. 926, the torture chamber in the Tower was built to crush body and soul alike. The rack was a simple wooden frame with rollers at either end turned by iron handles. Implements of pain hung in plain sight to soften resistance before a single turn of the wheel. 950, and was strapped down, wrists and ankles bound to the rollers. Even before the handles moved, the knowledge of what was coming was its own torment. Yet she met the sight with the same steady defiance she had shown from the start. 1015, the principle was brutally straightforward, slow, relentless stretching until joints parted from their sockets. Pain began as strain, became torment, then crescendoed with the wet pop of dislocation. The torturers could pause, question, then stretch again. 1044, victims stayed conscious the entire time, never allowed the mercy of fainting. What followed astonished every man in the room. As the rollers turned and shoulders and hips were torn from their sockets, she still refused to speak. The agony defies description. 1110, imagine every joint wrenched loose while you are forced to feel it all. Contemporary accounts say the torture was so appalling that when the professional torturer refused to go on, Wriothesley himself seized the handles. The Tower's executioner, a man inured to suffering, walked away rather than rack a woman. 1139, the effect on her tormentors was almost as profound as on Anne herself. Men who had broken countless prisoners found their certainty shaken by a woman who would not yield. Her silence undermined everything they thought they knew about human limits. 1210, court records describe the process in chilling detail, prolonged stretching followed by brief slackening so blood could rush back into crushed limbs, prolonging consciousness and pain. Between sessions she lay in her cell, unable to move as swollen joints throbbed. 1240, the aftermath left her crippled. She could no longer walk or stand, her arms dangled uselessly. In an age without anesthetics she lived in constant torment, yet her mind stayed clear and her faith unshaken. From her cell she wrote some of the most moving religious verse of the Tudor age, lines smuggled out to strengthen other believers. 1353, those prison poems speak of a body ruined but a soul triumphant, of conversations with God amid unbearable pain. They became priceless Protestant propaganda, proof that faith could outlast any cruelty. 1420, her trial was a foregone conclusion, a legal ritual to cloak a political killing. Condemned for heresy on the strength of her own writings and refusal to name others, she was carried into court and propped upright because her body could no longer sit unaided. 1515, sentence, burning alive at Smithfield. For most that would have been horror enough, but Anne would face the fire already broken and maimed by the rack. 1540, the same men who had racked her now sat as her judges, a closed circle of accusation, torture, and condemnation. Her helpless slump in the chair was itself a silent accusation against the state's power. 1601, in the weeks that followed, priests and officials took turns at her cell door, offers of pardon for recantation, pleas from her estranged husband, every tactic that had ever broken a prisoner. She answered each with quiet preaching instead of surrender. 1647, on the 16th of July 1546 she was carried through London in a chair to Smithfield. Condemned heretics normally walked, sometimes recanting on the way for a quicker death. Anne's chair became a final pulpit, her voice rang out over the crowds, calm and clear. 1708, the mood at Smithfield was unlike any previous burning. Many had come not to gloat but to witness the end of a woman whose courage had already become legend. Extra guards stood ready against possible riot or rescue. 1733, the stake was set for all to see, faggots piled high for a swift fierce blaze. Yet even here the horror deepened, her shattered body had to be hoisted from the chair and lashed upright with extra chains so she would not collapse into the fire too soon. 1827, by Tudor lights the execution was merciful, bags of gunpowder were hung about her body to hasten death by explosion. In practice it meant her already ruined frame would be torn apart while she still lived. 1853, as the flames rose, witnesses said she stayed conscious far longer than most. Her lips moved in prayer even as fire blackened her skin. When the gunpowder finally detonated, the blasts were so violent that burning fragments flew into the crowd. 1941, London left Smithfield in stunned silence. Officials claimed victory, yet many who watched went home sickened. Word of her torment and her steadfastness spread like wildfire. 2006, Protestant scribes preserved her writings, her story became a cornerstone of the English martyr tradition. Even some Catholics privately questioned the justice of torturing and burning a gentlewoman for belief alone. 2059, across Protestant Europe the news provoked outrage, a noble woman racked and burned was proof of Catholic barbarism and English tyranny. John Foxe later enshrined her in his Book of Martyrs, generations read her account in churches and drew courage from it. 2144, her death damaged England's standing among Protestant nations and handed reformers a propaganda triumph that echoed for centuries, even as far as the American colonies, where Puritans held her up as the pattern of resistance to religious oppression. 2212, Anne's story forces us to look straight at what human beings are capable of, both in endurance and in cruelty. Her torturers were not devils but respected statesmen, church-going, educated men, who sincerely believed they were saving England from chaos. 2315, they justified every turn of the rack as duty. The guards, the clerks, the judges, all could point to orders from above, diffusing guilt so thinly that no single hand seemed blooded. That is how ordinary people commit extraordinary evil while still thinking themselves decent. 2400 hours 08, Tudor society watched public burnings as acts of justice, not atrocity. Fear and dogma had normalized horrors we now find unthinkable. Both sides claimed God's warrant, turning absolute certainty into a warrant for violence. 25:07, Anne's gender made everything worse. Torturing a noblewoman shattered every convention, yet her persecutors thought feminine weakness would make her break faster and the spectacle more terrifying. They were wrong on both counts. 26-18, her case bent English law in ways that would not be straightened for generations: torture of the gently born, heresy charges for private talk, evidence taken under extreme duress. Emergency measures became precedents for future tyrants. 27:11, above all, an Askew's silence under unimaginable pain asks each of us what we would have done. She had every reason to speak, agony beyond bearing, a cause that seemed lost, strangers she protected at the cost of her body. Yet she chose conscience. 28:14, modern psychology struggles to explain how anyone withstands what she endured. Her own writings suggest she lived the passion alongside Christ, turning pain into communion and torment into strength. 28:45, her refusal saved the Protestant circle around Catherine Parr and helped ensure reform would triumph under Edward VI. Her tormentors, having staked everything on breaking her, walked away with nothing but a martyr's crown for their victim and a permanent stain on their names. That, in the end, was an Askew's victory.